Hi, I'm Karl Wells. Well, last time my guest spoke about his career in politics. We'll deal with that a little bit in this episode, but we're also going to talk mainly about his career as a writer, novelist, and this is his latest effort. It's called The Reincarnation of Winston Churchill, published by Boulder Books, available now, if you'd like to pick up a copy. My pleasure once again to welcome Bill Rowe to the program. Welcome, Bill.
Great to be here again, Karl.
I just want to go back to talking about politics briefly at the start. You held several portfolios in Joey Smallwood's government. Mm-hmm. Are there any that kind of stand out as being like a favorite? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I was very young when I went in, right? I got elected at 24 because of Joey, on Joey's coattails, not on my own merits, I hasten to add. And then, because of the revolt by Clyde Wells and John Crosby and others, some of the youngsters in the caucus, Ed Roberts, myself, and others, were pitchforked into the cabinet. And I was 26, still in short pants. I mean, it's ridiculous when I look back on it. And not only was I pitchforked into the cabinet, but Joey put me in charge fairly quickly, in charge of community and social development, which had to do with the DREE program. Hundreds of millions of dollars that were brought in by Trudeau for schools and infrastructure and roads and everything, all designed to try to bring the disadvantaged parts of Canada up to scratch. So I was involved in that, and I tell you, it was a heady experience. So I'd have to say that, yes, that would have been the most exciting thing that I was involved in, and especially as a young man.
Yeah. So when you eventually left politics, you went back to the law, you wrote, you became a commentator, but also ultimately an open line host.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, once I got out of politics, I wrote my first book, Claps Rock, which I loved doing, which was a thinly disguised caricature of Joey Smallwood and myself. So
you were Neil Godwin.
Yeah, that's right. You got a good memory, Karl. So I loved doing that. And part of the process, as you've discovered from your own writing, is that you have to go around with books, copies of books, dealing with people and signing and all that kind of thing. And one of the things I did as a labor of love was to go out to VOCM because Joe Butler was there, who I had a lot of admiration for, and two or three others who were there as well, John Murphy and so on. And so I went out there with a copy or two of those books in order to I was going to give Joe Butler a copy. And when I was out there, lo and behold, Elmer Harris, who was a friend of mine from Grand Falls, Windsor, because my district was White Bay South, so I was always stopping in Grand Falls, Windsor, and having a chat with him, Elmer. Elmer said, "Are you interested in open line?" And I said, "Am I interested in what? Open line?" "No, Elmer. I'm writing and I'm practicing law." He said, "We have an open line host here now." He said, "and what we think we need is another host added to him as a color commentator." I said, "I haven't got time to do the research." And so he said, "You don't have to do a thing. Just come in at 9 o'clock in the morning, go on, spend a couple of hours there with Karl."
Karl Sterrett.
Karl Sterrett was a well-known auctioneer, I think,
yes,
at the time,
right.
an antique dealer, an interesting fella from Northern Ireland. I had a lot of time for Karl, although there were certain aspects of him that were a little hard to take. But I said, okay, and how's Karl going to feel? He said, well, it's not his business, it's ours. We think we need some color commentating going on here on politics and this and that and the other thing. And we're sick and tired of hearing about reading tea leaves in cups of tea, and so we want to get involved. And so I said, yeah, I can do that, but I haven't got time to do the research. He said, you don't have to. You're not going to be the host, you'll just be in there shooting off your big fat face that you're so good at anyway from politics. You don't go into politics and stay there and get re-elected. Getting elected is nothing, right? Getting re-elected without being able to shoot off your face in some way. In any event, I said, oh, okay. So that was August, I think. And in September, I went in there. I was in there for a few months when Karl Stewart, unfortunately, got sick. And he got congestive heart failure. I went in to see him in the hospital, and there he was, hooked up to the oxygen and so on. And I said, Karl, how you doing? He said, this is a real pain in the butt, he said. And I could looking into his eyes, I could see what he meant. He didn't mean that to be trivial or superficial. He meant he was on his way out. A day or two later, he went to his son's wedding, and I think died from the exertion of that. Now, suddenly I find myself either having to do it or get off the pot myself. So they said, do you want to go on as host? I said, well, we'll give it a try. I went, and you know, the rest is history, because I did enjoy it, and I did develop a few little techniques there, and I liked talking to people, and it really added, I have to say, it really added to my writing abilities as well, because the cadence of human speech in Newfoundland, and all my writing is about Newfoundland, right? I wasn't interested. I mean, it might be touch on Oxford, it might touch on this, or you know, Ottawa or something, but it's Newfoundland centered. And I was really interested in how people spoke, especially the women. I mean, the women were really, I found women in Newfoundland were absolutely knowledgeable about what was going on in the world, and then the BS and the nonsense that was being spouted by politicians and so on. The men, well, a lot of the men were out 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, were out in their boats, right? And getting in and having a cup of tea, and probably not all that interested in the media, but the women were glued to open line shows. And they loved it, and they would call in and say what they believed was the situation. And I have to say, I really liked that. I loved interacting with them. And so I stayed on and on. I said to Joe Butler one time, Joe, how long, after about a year or two, how long do you think this will last? I mean, I got to start making my plans about practicing law and writing and so on. He said, well, maybe another year or two. 35 years later,
yeah,
I was still there, because I think my enthusiasm and my delight in what I was doing showed through a little bit. And because
but also, excuse me, also, Bill, you were pretty, you played it down the middle. You were very impartial. I think a lot of people, when you took on that job, might have expected you to be, you know, the partisan politician.
Sure, liberal.
Yeah, but you didn't play it that way. That was a conscious decision, I take it.
It was a very conscious decision, and Brian Peckford used to call up, and Brian had no problem with, you know, my prejudices or anything. I mean, he knew he was going to get a fair shake. But people loved to get on it, like, you know, Jean Charest, before he. When he was running for the leadership of the Tory party early on, not this time, way many years ago, used to come down and go on the show. When he turned liberal and became liberal leader and premier, he used to call in from Quebec to talk about stuff. So these guys liked it. They liked it, and I liked having them, of course.
It was a virtual town square.
It was.
Really?
It was. That's right. It was the old ancient Greek agora, where the town square where democracy was practiced by people shooting off their face, the high and the low. It made no difference. You could, if you had something to say it, and you could say it on open line.
So let's talk about your first book, Claps Rock. That book was a Canadian bestseller. You received glowing reviews from Saturday Night Magazine, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Robert Fulford.
Robert Fulford and I became friends over that.
Oh, really?
He liked it so much that when he came down here one time, he looked me up, and I used to see him when I went up to Toronto.
So that must have made you feel great.
It did, but I have to say, I mean, I worked hard at it, but a couple of things made it what it was. One, I suppose, the writing and the story. And people, as soon as they got wind of the fact that it had to do with Joey, that was helpful. But you had
Percy Clapp.
Yeah, Percy Clapp. That's exactly right. But then you had people like Robert Fulford writing a great review. I had an agent, Beverly Slopin, who was in Toronto. She was so helpful at the time. Richard Gwynn and I became friends when he was writing his book on Joey. When he came down, he called up and we got together. We had dinner at my house, as a matter of fact, and he wanted to pick my brain on Joey Smallwood, and I was very frank with him, and he appreciated that. And so when my book came out, he and Sandra Gwynn, not so much Richard, because Richard was a little bit arrogant. I mean, I liked him a lot, but he was a little bit, Well, one time someone said to me, "Well, he's a Brit." And I said, "Yeah, well, I know lots of Brits there," but that's what came across, right? The beauty of Richard was who he was married to, Sandra Gwynn. Sandra was a Newfoundlander.
And a brilliant writer.
And a brilliant writer. And Robert Fulford loved her. She used to write for Saturday Night and others. But she wrote these great books. One of them won the Governor General's Award. But besides all that, she promoted Newfoundlanders up in Ottawa. I mean, Codco and Ray Guy and people like that. If she'd been alive when Rick Mercer was on the go, she would have been going around putting up posters, right? I mean, that's what she really promoted Newfoundland. And she and Richard had this great big launch party in their house in Ottawa. They lived in Ottawa at the time. And everyone was there. I mean, they were so well respected that they had people there. They had Jean Chrétien was there. I don't know if he was minister at the time or can't recall, but he was there and delighted to be there, and all these people. And then someone arranged, I think it was Sandra, and in cahoots with my agent, Beverly, arranged for the book to be published in New York. And so we had a launch at the Canadian consulate in New York. Wow,
I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
I'm so bashful. I don't spread stuff around enough. But in any event, I'm glad to have this opportunity, Karl.
Feel free.
But in any event, went down there and we had this great launch there. Every Newfoundlander in New York was invited, and the jazz pianist, what's the jazz pianist? Oscar Peterson.
Yes.
He was there getting an award of some sort, and we went down to Greenwich Village and heard him play that night, a bunch of us from Newfoundland and so on. But, I mean, it was a heady time. And I can remember I was doing some commentary at the time with Peter Zosky as the Newfoundland correspondent. And he asked me about it. And he said, "My God," he said, "I'm really jealous. I said, "It really is. To go to Barnes & Noble Peter, and see your book, because of the alphabet Rowe, next to Philip Roth in Barnes and Noble, I said, is a very heady experience.
Yeah.
He said, yeah.
And also, this is something that doesn't happen very often. Your novel, Claps Rock, was serialized by CBC Radio, turned into a radio drama.
It was.
And pretty impressive. So how did you feel about that? Were you happy with the result?
Yeah, I was happy with the result. The play itself on the radio was great. I wasn't happy at the money, because the authors are supposed to starve to death. Everyone else involved is supposed to make money. And if I remember, here's a national program. My book was serialized by a playwright whose name eludes me at the moment, but a national playwright who was paid. He told me afterwards how much he was paid. It was a lot of money. I got $900 out of it.
Wow.
What was I? I was the author.
Yeah.
The writer, right? So
it sounds like the way screenwriters are treated in Hollywood, or at least the way they used to be treated.
Used to be treated in Hollywood, but at least whether it was filmed or not, they got some money out of it. But they were all living on the edge of poverty, no doubt about that. But I mean, I remember saying that at a writers' union meeting, saying, "Why are authors? What is wrong with you guys? You got this union going here, and we're treated like dirt. Why don't you make sure that authors get the star, not only the star billing, because there was a feeling at the CBC that, you should be happy that we're giving you all this publicity." No, I want the money.
Yeah.
It's not the publicity.
Yeah.
It's the money.
Yeah.
But, that's what I say now. But the point is that authors, I don't know if authors have come more into their own now these days or not. But, I mean, in the old days, unless you're Margaret Atwood or someone, and even then she paid her dues, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about the current book, the Reincarnation of Winston Churchill. Where did the idea for this book come from?
Well, two things happened to me in my life that sort of gripped me. One of them was the tragedy of the Beothics, and that has gripped every Newfoundlander. It gripped my father to the point where he had to write a book about it. Why did he write a book? One of the reasons he wrote.
The Beothics of Newfoundland.
The Beothics of Newfoundland. One of the reasons why was because he was from Notre Dame Bay, and his relatives, maybe some ancestors, were some of the frontiersmen who were accused of barbarity concerning the Beothics, and he wanted to write a book that set the record straight and had the facts there rather than the legends and the foolish stuff that was written by Harold Horwood, for example, wrote a book that slandered all of Newfoundland, the people who killed Beothics for fun. Well, I don't know if it was for fun or not. Somebody once told me that at the time that the Beothics were being savaged by Newfoundland, by frontiersmen and so on, such as they were, at the same time, we were leaders in the world, our government here in Sudan, trying to help the Beothics, trying to get some sort of an organization going that would keep settlers from killing Beothics. At the time, that was official policy in the United States to send the army out to Wounded Knee and shoot every man, woman, and child there. We were trying officially to help. It didn't come to anything, unfortunately. But my father wrote, the dedication in his book is to Mary March's husband, the Mastuart's husband, Nona Bassett, how you pronounce, I don't know, but that's my try to pronounce it, who died was murdered basically, in an attempt, a brave but suicidal attempt to save his wife. from being taken by the Paytons of Notre Dame Bay. So he dedicated it to that. So there's that. And I was gripped by the courage shown by him, by this chief of the Beothicks in those days. So there was that. Secondly, I was always gripped from an early age by Winston Churchill. Where in the name of God did Winston Churchill decide, where did it come from that he decided to take on the Nazis and Hitler at a time when all of his class and most of other people in Britain, the last thing they wanted was a war. They had come through the First World War. They didn't want a war. They wanted to appease this guy, this strong man, Hitler. And Churchill wasn't having anything to do with it. Where did that come from? And I used to mull that over in my mind. And then I learned that he took great pride in the fact that he descended from the indigenous people of North America. His mother was a close relative of indigenous people of North America. And I studied that up and dug into it and found...
And that's based on fact?
That's based on fact. Wow. Yeah, he said to Roosevelt said, you know, Winston, President Roosevelt, you know, Winston, my ancestors were among the first to settle in Manhattan Island. And Churchill says, and you know, Franklin, my ancestors were there to welcome them when they came ashore. And, you know, and he was very pleased with it. And his grandson, Winston Churchill, actually took a trip to the States and North America to try to dig out whatever facts they could. It's very loosey-goosey, you know, the facts, but Churchill himself had no doubt about it. Some people figured that he was descended from the Iroquois because he was such a warrior, and they were a warrior nation. But he denied that, no. And so I decided to write a book in which I combine the two things, his indigenous ancestry, his insight into Nazism and what it was really against everyone else in his country. As a matter of fact, people were embarrassed by him. I mean, he was in the wilderness for years as a result of shooting off about this all the time. Chamberlain and these guys were heroes. And so he decided to take on the Nazis. And I combined the two. I combined that feeling on his part, where did he get it, with his tremendous knowledge of indigenous North America and his knowledge of Newfoundland. I mean, he was extremely knowledgeable about Newfoundland and the Beothicks. He read Howley's book back in 1905, I think that came out, studied it, loved it. He was colonial secretary, ravaged the archives when it came to indigenous people of North America, and did all kinds of research on it. As far as Newfoundland was concerned, he was the best small boatman in the world. The convoy system that was used by Newfoundland fishermen going back and forth, he adapted that to the First World War and saved England's supply ships. His bases, long before Roosevelt got into the war, he got Roosevelt to set up American bases here. Churchill did that, and they developed the rights, the United Nations, basically. They developed that together. Botwood, which was a seaplane port, I should say. Churchill ordered the first ship that was captured, enemy ship that was captured in North America, a German ship, which was either filled with minerals from Buchan's or wood from Grand Falls. I'm not sure which it was. He ordered that ship captured, first ship in North America during the war. and they were sent off to, the Germans were sent off to, and on and on. I mean, there are all kinds of examples of that. And so I combined his indigenous pride, his knowledge of the Beothics and the Mi'kmaq. The Mi'kmaq in this book come out, I hope, come out very, very well. And they were often slandered as being killers of Beothics. Not a iota
Not true.
of proof. Not an iota of proof about it. And but in any event, so I brought these two things together.
Bill, thank you. We're out of time, unbelievably. This is the book, The Reincarnation of Winston Churchill, by Bill Rowe, and from Boulder Books. Great read. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
And until next time.